So today we're going to do the inaugural episode of Two Brewers Having a Beer. I have Peter Cowles with me from the Aspetuck Brewery, a fellow Bridgeport brewer, and we're going to start with his bronze medal winning beer from the Great American Beer Festival. This is Gray Matter, and it is a Saison, correct?
It's a Grisette, yeah, a subset of Saison, absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about it.
So this is a very traditional farmhouse ale from Belgium. The Saison family, typically brewed for the field hands. Grisettes were typically brewed for the miners coming out of the mines at the end of the day, out of the coal mines.
Not underage miners.
Not underage miners. And the name Grisette actually means little gray. And there were women who would come out and serve the miners small glasses of beer on these trays, and they would wear gray outfits. And that was the root of the name Grisette. So those were the little grays serving the miners.
Very cool.
They're Grisettes.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Now, the point of doing Two Brewers Having a Beer is to learn a little bit about the person that I'm with, a little bit about his brewery, and hopefully everybody will learn a little bit about the beers as well. Now, Pete and I have something in common. We are both Bridgeport brewers.
Absolutely.
And you started brewing just a few months, or opened just a few months before we opened Brewport.
Yep.
And I think we have a lot in common, specifically that your attention to detail and historic styles like you're just talking about with the Grisette. You want to tell us how'd you become a brewer?
So I've always loved cooking and grew up with both my parents were good cooks. My dad baked, my mom cooked a lot, and brewing is kind of a subset of cooking. You know, you're playing around with a lot of different ingredients. You're playing with heat, you're playing with time, temperature, and what we find in our mill room or in our hop cabinet is literally our spice cabinet. So. I grew very interested in beer when I was of age to enjoy beer, and my brother, 3 years older, was into beer, and I learned a lot from him as well. And the moment I saw home brewing was in 1991. I was living in New York City, and some of my friends got a homebrew kit, and they made some beer, and I was like, this is unbelievable. And I'm gonna get a kit once I have a space big enough to actually brew. And sure enough, a couple years later, I moved to Boston, had a space big enough to brew. And the first thing I did when I moved to Boston was got out and got a brew kit and never stopped. And that was, wow, that was 20-something years ago, 23, 24 years ago. So the brewery grew out of that. After brewing for 17 or 18 years, I saw the business opportunities, started putting together the business model. And we chose the Black Rock section of Bridgeport. There hadn't been a brewery, as you all know, in Bridgeport since 1939.
Since the Bridgeport Brewing Company, yeah. Doing sales.
Opening a brewery in Bridgeport was certainly a challenge. There was a lot of education for the city.
Thanks for plowing that field for me, by the way.
Absolutely met the Barretts while going through zoning.
Mm-hmm.
We're really proud to be the first brewery in Bridgeport in over 70 years, and super happy that you moved to town slightly after we did.
We were within a couple of months of each other.
Yeah.
And now we have a third friend in the brewing business right here in Bridgeport.
Yeah.
And I think you were at the brewery just a couple hours before I was.
I sure was. I went down to Berlinetta last weekend on their opening day and was super impressed with what they've done with their space and their beers, and they've only just begun. So yeah. Welcome to town. We're really happy to have them.
Well, cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
So a little uneven pour here. This is the summer ale from Aspetuck, and I'm very fond of this beer. Brewport, as I mentioned, is about 3 miles away from Aspetuck, but I take the beach road when I bike all the way to past Aspetuck, go along Fairfield Beaches, and then come back and stop. And you're always very generous and give me a nice cold beverage to help me on my way for the last 3 miles back to Brewport. A lot of you may know, and if you don't, Connecticut breweries are all getting together, and we're part of what's called Team Craft Beer. And Team Craft Beer all ride together, and we're raising money for Smilow Cancer Hospital and the Closer to Free ride. Aspetuck will be part of Team Craft Beer this year. I have been pouring beer at the Closer to Free event since it started, and have been able to bike for the last 3 years because I got a brand new knee, and that's been letting me do that. This is a terrific light ale. Want to tell us just a little bit about it?
Sure. This is actually this came out of a homebrew recipe, which was my blonde ale. And I tweaked it, I changed it a little bit, I lightened it up a little bit, and I ended up dry hopping it just a touch. So some people don't like hops, and if you tell them it's dry hop, they steer away from it. But if you tell them it's a summer ale, they'll drink it between Memorial Day and Labor Day. So we made it super light, super refreshing, 5% dry. It's a blend of Pilsner and two-row malt, which are the base malts that most brewers use for everything, with a touch of wheat. It gives it a nice, crispy finish, kind of a cereally, nice flavor finish, and some good head retention. I mean, brewers use wheat for head in their beers. It's one of those things.
I've been brewing for almost 30 years commercially, and every early recipe had a small amount of wheat in it because it was old school to give you head retention. Yeah. We now have enough of other things that it's used less and less.
Certainly, malts have changed.
That you're still doing that.
Yeah, and I really like the flavor on the finish for this. And then we dry hop it with a classic American hop, Cascade, which I think every brewer has used at some point or another.
Used to be one of only 4 hops available.
Pretty much, yeah.
And
and the classic hop in Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, which is a core favorite of just about any beer drinker out there.
Absolutely.
And one of the OGs.
Yes.
And I use a touch, literally 1 pound of Citra. In the dry hop,
which is a great hop, but I think it's a little overused.
It's overused.
I mean, our 7th inning SIPA is all Citra, but it's the only beer that we have that has that.
Yeah, it can be very dominant, which actually we'll see in our next beer. But I think in here it just gives it a little like, that's really crisp, really nice, and really summer, and that's what we wanted to get out of this beer. It's super refreshing.
Now I have a question that I like to ask every brewer. And I've traveled all around the country as well as through certain areas of England. I always ask the same question. We're all doing the same thing. We're all basically have the same equipment. But there's always something. There's always some sticking point. What at your brewery was the biggest pain in the ass or the biggest thing you had to overcome to constantly create a consistent product?
Well, I think our big challenge is lack of space. And I mean, we built the brewery to be effective and efficient, yet as you grow, that changes. And we can't really add any more tanks. We can't add any more space because we're in a fixed space. We've been able to be very, very efficient with what we do with that space. Everything's on wheels for the most part, or can be moved with a pallet jack. So,
well, you originally built your brewery to be a production brewery for distribution, and
well, we actually were really focusing on the tap room.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So
we were focused on the tap room. However, our
because the laws had just recently changed before that.
The laws, yeah, exactly, and that's we were aiming. Actually, our original model was production, and then when we were writing our business plan, Two Roads came to town and changed the legislation, which I think every brewery in
nice
the
to have a big brother to help you with that. Huh?
Yeah, I think honestly, Two Roads has done more for the startup breweries in the state than anybody, because without that change in legislation, a tap room revenue model would not exist. And I think that's super important. I mean, your background was certainly in the brew pub restaurant business, which was the law before. If you wanted to serve pints, you had to serve food and have a kitchen. And
I did do distribution brewing for a while, but I hated it. I love the brew pub side of it. We're going to jump into the next beer. So now we're moving on to Oh My Juice. Let me give it a quick taste. Oh, I mean, just pan right up to it when you're done. Never leave somebody hanging. This is wonderful. So this is your IPA?
This is one of our IPAs, 100% Citra, 6%. One of the things we do, we don't leave a ton of haze in there. We let it clear out and we let it finish fermentation. So it's nice and dry. And you can actually have more than one of these without feeling full.
It doesn't rip your throat apart like some of the New England style ones.
That's true. Which, again, it's a preference of taste. But this, for us, we're canning, and we like to have our beers to have a little more shelf life than some of the
Than-
hazy stuff out there.
Than
Yeah.
3 weeks, I would agree.
Yeah.
So all of your beers are available right at the brewery,
Mhm.
which is on, what's your address?
Fairfield Avenue, 3389 Fairfield Avenue in the Black Rock neighborhood of Bridgeport.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank you, Pete, for being the very first brewer to have two brewers having a beer.
It's an honor.
And if you like this content and you want to see more, please feel free to send us messages. Who do you think we should interview? And we plan on doing other brewers in Connecticut as well as all over the country. Cheers.
Cheers.